2024 was a bit of a milestone year for me, primarily due to my new living space, but also the fact that this is the year I finally got into Tekken since playing Tekken 5 almost 20 years ago. So, with my experience in photo modes and real cameras, I'd like to make a contribution to the Tekken community and explain the Tekken 8 photo mode. Let's see what we can learn, and let's see how we can get your custom character looking amazing as usual. My name is Mir, and let's get started, shall we? So I'm in practice mode, and to access the photo mode, go ahead and pause the game, and then you're going to see photo mode down here at the bottom. Now, there are a couple things to set up before we go into photo mode. Firstly, what we want to do is go into the display settings and then turn off your hit properties. You will see these. So like, let's say, for example, if I do this, go into photo mode, you're going to get the hit properties. If you want that, great, you can leave it on. If you want that off, you can go ahead and turn it off. The rest of the heads-up display will be fine, so those you could just leave on if you want to. The next thing I want to do is go into the restart settings and then go down here to stage environment. So this new beat stage that just got added with the Lydia patch, what I want to do, I want to set this to evening. I really like the sunset shot of this, so go ahead and restart. Yeah, I love this. This looks amazing. Alright, let's get into the photo mode. So the first thing I want to talk about is the controls of this photo mode. It is kind of similar to other photo modes, but what I really like about this, the fact that it's optimized for an arcade stick. So you're going to see it here on screen. This is my Hori Alpha, and I'll be using this for the remainder of the video. So if you have an arcade stick, just know that you can actually utilize this photo mode pretty easily with the arcade stick. So with the left joystick or your arcade stick, you can actually move around the camera pretty easily. Now if you hit square, then you can actually go into like an orbiting mode. So you can go left and right and up and down. Hit square again and you have a free range camera. Just a heads up, I'm on PlayStation, so I'll be making PlayStation notations, but keep that in mind for whatever platform you're on. Now if you hold L1, you can actually speed up the camera. So if you want to get somewhere quickly, you can do that. Now if you hold R1, you're going to get more access to camera controls. So let's say you press square and circle, or 1 and 4, you can pan the camera left and right, and same thing with triangle and X, or 2 and 3, you can pan it up and down. Now if you keep holding R1 and you use the stick, you can actually dolly the camera up and down. Now I've messed with multiple photo modes before, and I will say the fact that this is optimized for an arcade stick is actually a pretty unique feature. I really like this. One thing I forgot to mention about the controls is that if you hold R1 and you press L2 or R2, you can actually rotate the image and go for more of a portrait shot if you wanted to. So next you want to go ahead and hit the options button. And before we go into the controls, let's go ahead and hit R1 and then go down to the grid, and we want to turn this on. This will help compose your shot. This here is the rule of thirds. Now, it's not a definite rule, you're allowed to break it, but basically this will help you compose and line up your shot. So let's go back to this camera tab, and here you're going to see lens type. So these are actually predetermined, pre-selected presets of different lens types. So if you go to the left, you have your wide angle, you have a battle, you have a standard camera, telephoto, and a super telephoto. So and these are great. Now, if you're not as familiar with zooming in or like wide angle or telephoto, this is a great way to just jump in and get a specific shot that you want. If you don't want to use the preset and you want to manually control it, you can actually just go back and you'll see L2 and R2 is also zooming in and out, and these will give you more precise control. So where the lens types will give you presets, this will give you more finite controls of the exact focal length that you want. So now if we line up June and Reina here on the rule of thirds, let's go ahead and go back to the lens types. So now let's say we go to the wide angle, you'll notice that a lot of the scene will change. So with wide angle, you're going to get wide angle distortion, where your foreground and your background are spread apart. They look like they're further away from each other. Now, if you go all the way to, like, let's say telephoto, we keep June and Reina there. This here will introduce your telephoto compression, where your foreground and your background are compressed. They look like they're right next to each other and they get pulled together. So with wide angle and telephoto, the way I would recommend using these as like a starting point is wide angle is great for getting your subject in a scene or in like a wide environment or the environment itself. I think the wide angle is suited for that. Whereas telephoto is good for portraits. So like let's say if I wanted a close-up of June here, let's move the camera a little bit. You can see it's a lot more flattering on a person. And you can also do this for like accents and so on. So like for example, like her headband right here, if you wanted to like really zoom in on it and get a close-up shot of that, telephoto is the way to go for these kind of things. Next, let's move on to the autofocus, and you have the ability to autofocus straight to player 1 or player 2. So it doesn't matter which side you play on, you can focus immediately on your character. You can also turn autofocus completely off and have manual modes as well. So if we go into adjust focus, and let's say we start moving it to the left, what ends up happening is that the focal point, the focal range, will actually move like closer to you, whereas if you go to the right, it'll move further back. Now what I would recommend with adjusting focus, if you're taking a picture of someone and it's showing their face, what you want to do is focus on their eyes. That way you have a more natural looking image. If you want it out of focus, I mean, that's up to you as well, but that's a good starting point to make sure that the eyes are in focus. Next, you have a zoom control, so you can set your lens type with telephoto and then make minor adjustments here in the zoom. Next is your blur. Now, if we go to the right, what you're going to see is that everything is going to be more in focus, whereas to the left, everything will be blurred out. This blur in photography is known as bokeh. Now, something else to note as well with the blur, let's say we go all the way to 1.0, we go to adjust focus. What you're going to notice is that if you start, like let's say we start moving the focus closer away from June, closer to Reina, you'll notice that you have this very small window of focus. It's a very small plane that you're working with. It's like this little sliver that's moving back and forth on the screen with just a little bit in focus. So like let's say for example I get Reina's like hair in focus, right? And then we decrease the blur, you'll see more starts getting in focus, and that little plane, that little sliver is getting wider. So let's move on to the next tab. Here with the display character setting, you can go ahead and turn off an individual character if you wanted to, so turning off player 1 or player 2, or you can just get rid of both entirely and take a picture of the environment or the stages if you'd like. Next is your effects display. So let me actually back out of this. That way you can see what I'm talking about. So like let's say we do... So let's say we do that, right? Go back into the photo mode. Let's go here. So let's say we turn off the effects display. Whatever move that your character is doing, whatever effects that are there, you can choose to turn off the effects if you'd like. So next is your heads-up display, and this is just your health bar. So if you wanted to keep it on there for that shot, you can also turn it off, but it auto turns off, but you can keep it on if you'd like. So display control guide, I mean, it's self-explanatory. It gets rid of the icons at the bottom. And of course the grid, we want to keep that on. So next in the color tab, you have your white balance. So let's say if we start moving to the right, the image starts to get a lot warmer, whereas to the left, everything gets a little bit colder, a little bit cooler. So this is, a bit of a personal preference, but, try to use the environment as like a gauge of where you want your white balance to be. So in this example, we have this sun setting on a beach. So it would be a little bit warmer, a little bit more cozy. So we want to bump up the white balance a little bit. Now with settings like photography settings, subtlety is key. So just keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, it's your image. Do what you like. Next is your saturation, and this is primarily boosting or getting rid of the color. So if we go to the right, this will increase the color and just really saturate the image. Whereas if you go the opposite direction to the left, you can get rid of the color or reduce the color, and you can either go for like let's say a black and white image if you want, or you can go for more of like a vintage look if you want to go for that as well. Next is your contrast, and this is basically the relationship between your highlights and your shadows. So let's say if we start increasing it, if we go to the right and start increasing your contrast, you'll notice that there's a defined hard line between your highlights and your shadows. Whereas if you go to the left, it kind of smooths out the relationship between the two and it kind of blends the image all together. So if you're a Tekken content creator, for example, and you want to make thumbnails, maybe boosting the contrast a little bit to make your thumbnails pop is the way to go. So next is your brightness, and it's pretty self-explanatory. You can increase your brightness or you can decrease it. Now, one thing you can probably notice, let me actually change the camera angle. So take a look at the sun setting in the background. Now, if we increase the brightness, what's going to end up happening is that some of the detail in the middle of the sun is going to get lost, and it's going to be what's known as like a blown out highlight. Now, if you go the opposite direction and you start decreasing the brightness, you'll notice some of the clouds that's in front of it, you'll start getting more details in that. Now, that's more of a finite detail if you want to, go that far into like editing your image, but that's just something to note. Your brightness will affect the overall image, but you can lose or gain some details depending on where you put the brightness slider. Next tab is your filters, and this is pretty self-explanatory. There's multiple filters you can put on, and let's say we go for this, right, something artistic. Now there's no way to decrease this filter, only increase it. So where it says filter strength, that's your baseline right there, and then your option is to increase the filter. I think one thing that would be nice to see is a way to decrease the filter a little bit. Next is your vignette, and this is essentially an oval that closes in on the middle of the screen. So if we increase this, you'll see that this oval is coming in from the corners and it starts darkening up the corners. And the reason why you'd want to use this is to have someone focus their eyes closer to the middle of the screen. So next you have your screen effects, and I'm actually going to do a move real quick to kind of showcase what I'm talking about here. Give me just a moment. So let's start with the bloom. If you increase the bloom, you'll notice that these little sparks around June here, they start glowing, and that's basically what your bloom is. It's just an area of bright light that just gives off a glow. Next is a lens flare, which you can turn on, and it kind of gives you a very subtle flare from any sort of like bright source of light. Now, one thing I did notice, let's say you turn off the lens flare and you turn off the bloom. If you decide to go with just a lens flare but no bloom, it'll automatically adjust the bloom for you. See how it like shot all the way up to the right, the bloom setting? So just keep that in mind if you're messing around with the bloom and lens flare. So the same can be said for the dirt mask setting. So if we start increasing this, you can see some dirt and debris in the top left corner, and you can use this as more of like an artistic look, more of a gritty look, so to speak. Next is your chromatic aberration, and this is typically a lens defect, and usually in some sort of photo editing software, there's usually like a little check mark to remove chromatic aberration. But you can see how some of the colors, like in the corner, like you can see on June's headband, how some of the colors are distorting, which again, it's a defect, but if you wanted to use it for more like a creative or artistic expression, you can go ahead and use that. Next is your noise, and you can go ahead and add some grain, some noise in the image if you'd like. And I think this will actually pair well with adjusting your saturation. So if you start removing the saturation, maybe a little bit of contrast, you can go for more of a vintage, like old school feel. The next tab is your water drops tab. And this is more of like an artistic thing, which I don't think I've seen in other photo modes. But basically you turn it on and you have 4 different water drops that you can put as like an overlay on your image, and this will pair well in this beach stage, facing the water, or in that one really rainy stage. You can use this water drop feature in those kind of stages. Then of course you have your levels to adjust it, and then how blurry do you want the actual water to be. So do you want it to kind of fade into the background and make it more subtle? You can do that as well. There are a couple instances where the photo mode will activate, but it won't give you control of the camera. So let me go ahead and show you a couple. So let me start with the June combo. So if we go into the photo mode, it won't let you move the camera during specific animations. So keep that in mind with whichever character that you have. So in this case with June and this ending animation, I can't move the camera around. So the same can be said if I try to go into heat. And if I go for a rage art. Now, at the time of recording this video, there is a campaign going on social media with the hashtag Tekken 30th from July 2024 till I believe October 2024, where if you take some cool shots and use that hashtag, you may be featured in official Tekken events. Now, if this video has been useful and you share your image using hashtag Tekken 30th, please feel free to tag me at Mir-or-Image. I'd like to see the pictures you guys take. So I think that's going to be it for me today, and I'll see you next time.